I am the White Dragon.
And this is Sir Briz.
And you are listening to episode 23 of the BeyondUnreal Podcast. First off, we have to apologize for not having a full podcast video last week. Our schedules just didn't match up, but there was a lot of changes. So, which one you want to go after first?
Well, the translocator is probably the most controversial change. Basically, what they've done in the past couple of weeks now is they slowed down the translocator disk significantly, and they sped up how fast you can translocate after you throw the disk. The speed on it it's not as slow as UT was, but it's also not fast.
It's definitely moved in the direction of UT99.
Yeah. When you're using the translocator, you're more likely now to do shorter throws with faster translocations, and you can do basically all the super annoying things that you could do in UT. You can get right in somebody's face, translocate all over the place, confuse the heck out of them, annoy them, and there's very little that they can do to stop that.
Yeah, so last week I went and I made a video just compiling some of the things that I had done with the translocator just in that one Friday. So everything that you saw in that video was captured in one day, and picked clips to try and demonstrate how the translocator had changed. So the first thing that you're going to notice right away is that you just can't get from flag to flag as quickly. They've decreased the speed of the disc by about 20%, so that means it takes about 20% longer to get there. Face is a good example. It takes about 2 seconds longer to get to the flag now, and that means that in situations where it was going to be a last second save before, you're going to be too late. And man, those numbers are like just on the edge, because I used to get the last second save on face all the time. You go back and look at past podcasts, almost every flag grab there was somebody there trying to stop them at the last second, and now you can't do it. If they kill you at the center, you're home free. You're going to cap it.
And there's definitely some nuance there. I mean, if there's other people in their base, it's going to add some challenge. But essentially, if you can get everyone off of your side and past the middle, then you're home free. You can get to your flag base and score. That challenge for you with the way the translocator is right now is clearing out your base. It's not keeping the flag defended the whole time that it's being carried or any of those kinds of things. The primary strategy is clear out your base and get your flag in there. So it does change the way that CTF is played quite a bit. Now, is it necessarily a negative change? I don't know that we know exactly whether it's overall negative yet. There are things about it that personally I don't like. There's some people that like the translocator for what they can do in close range with it. There's other people that like the translocator for getting across the map quickly. I definitely fall in the getting across the map quickly camp. I don't really care if I can translocate on top of a box right next to me if I can't translocate across the map.
You know, going back to the speed number, you know, it's 20% slower. And that means that the overall pace of the game is going to be a little bit slower. You're going to have less flag grabs. You're going to have less flag returns. You're less likely to prevent a cap because you can't catch up to them or whatever. There's just going to be less action in general because people don't get around and meet each other as much. So the pace is definitely slowed down. Now, I don't like that. I don't really know what the goal is. Maybe Epic is okay with the game being a little bit slower. I mean, it was furious before. I mean, it was crazy, and it was really engaging for me, but I'm not the average gamer, so.
Well, and you can see that if you watch the podcast from a couple weeks ago where we played outside.
Yep.
It was extremely intense the entire game, and you'll remember from the podcast that we said you almost needed that halftime break because it was just so intense. It was like 10 straight minutes of intensity, and then you had a short break, and then 10 straight more minutes of more intensity. And that is something that I personally like. I like a very intense game. I loved how intense CTF was in 2KX, 2K3, and 2K4. And that was one of the things that I disliked the most in UT3 was it lost some of that intensity. It was a much slower pace to capture the flag.
Oh yeah, in UT3, CTF was so slow that It wasn't worth playing. Nobody played it.
For me, this change is moving the translocator closer to the UT3 translocator than what I prefer.
But going on to the other thing that changed with that, and that is the refire times. And there are 2 refire times. There is a time between when you throw the disc and when you can translocate, and that in this build is 0.25 seconds, whereas before it was 0.3. And then there is a time between when you translocate and when you can throw it again. Last week's build, they left that alone, so it was 0.2. This build, I think they kind of realized that was a little bit much, and so they added 50 milliseconds back onto the second refire rate between when you translocate and when you can fire it again. Now, you might be thinking, like, 50 milliseconds, that's not a big deal. It's a big deal. Oh my gosh. Completely different translocator after 50 milliseconds. Past weeks, I would maybe get, like, 1 or 2 telefrags a night. Last week, this week, easy to get telefrags. Because the player just doesn't have a whole lot of time to adjust to you throwing the disc. It's basically, you're going to translocate a quarter of a second after you throw it. That's a quarter of a second that they have to react. Most average human reaction time, even the best players, is like 0.2, 0.25 seconds. So you're basically going to translocate before they even have the opportunity to react to it. And that's why moving it from 0.3 to 0.25 is made a big difference. Adding the 50 milliseconds onto the second refire rate, bear with me, I know this is complicated. adding 50 milliseconds onto the second firing rate, I thought would make a little bit of a difference. Steve changed that on Monday, so clearly he thought that it was a bit much from the last build, but it didn't make a little bit of difference. Sure enough, first thing I did when I got into the map was I telefragged Cafe 2 times in a row. I got Killinith. It was just easy. It's too easy at 0.25 seconds. And, there's some other factors involved. There's the hitbox. There's just how far the disc goes. I actually find it easier to telefrag people when the disc isn't as fast because you can then telefrag them closer.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it's balanced right now, it's a real challenge, and I know that they have plans to change it further, but I think part of the concern is I just don't know where they're trying to go with it. What is the goal with the translocator? Because we're talking about all these numbers, and a lot of these numbers were the same or lower in 2K4. You didn't hear a lot of people complaining about how the translocator was balanced in 2K4. But
they weren't complaining about being telefragged too much, that's for sure.
Exactly. The primary difference between the 2K4 translocator and this translocator is that the 2K4 translocator had charges, and when you used up the charges, essentially what would happen is your refire rate would drop significantly until you gained more charges. The benefit from that was that for however many charges you started with, you had a super powerful weapon that you could do just about whatever you wanted with. But then when you ran out of the charges, you were slowed down significantly. So people had to be way more strategic with their use of the translocator. Sure, you could translocate really close to yourself and you could make getting a telefrag a little bit easier, but you only had 5 chances to do that. And once you ran out of those chances, you were done. With the translocator the way it is right now in UT4, it's the same kind of power that the 2K4 translocator had, but with none of the limitations. There's no charges on it. You can shoot it as fast as you want. And in fact, you can look on TWD's channel and see where he slightly modified the translocator to make it so that you could translocate almost as fast as you wanted to. And it's insane what you can do with it. So basically, there's no limitations on it right now. And I know that I will get a lot of heat for saying this, but the charges was a better solution to the translocator than what they're trying to go with right now. Trying to balance all the numbers and make the translocator work without having charges is a losing game, I think. The thing is that you want the translocator to be extremely powerful for a certain period of time.
When you're transversing the map, basically.
Yeah, and you should be encouraging people to use the translocator in a way that benefits the team because it's a team game. And doing these super short translocations really fast doesn't really do anything to benefit the team. It's just
to be annoying,
to kill people. There's a lot of different reasons why it's used, but you getting across the map is more of a benefit to your team.
Yeah, so you mentioned my video. I made a video a couple of days ago where I was just messing around with the translocator, and I changed the firing rates basically to 0 so that you can see what exactly they do and why decreasing those numbers makes the translocator more powerful. But yeah, I think it's too easy to telefrag people right now. And I have video proof, and there will be more video proof until it is not easy to telefrag people.
Well, and it goes back a little bit to what I was just saying about having charges. Maybe it's okay for it to be easy to telefrag people, but there should be a limit to it.
Yeah.
If the charges are there, then there's a limit to how easy it is to telefrag somebody. You only have 5 shots to do that in.
Yeah, well, I do believe that the charges was an effective solution in 2004. But I also think that the solution that we had 3 weeks ago was a good solution as well. That 50 milliseconds on the first rethrow time made a big difference. And having the longer throw made a big difference. And I did not find it terribly... I did get telefrags, but it wasn't easy like it is now to get telefrags. I think the thing that some people didn't like about that one was that you could really catch up to the flag carrier, right? You generally had 2 opportunities to stop them. You could stop them once when they got to the middle, and then you could try and stop them once again on a last-second save. And a lot of people didn't like that. I love that. I think Cliffy B would call it 0 time to spectacle. I call it balls to the wall action. I like that furious gameplay. I understand not everybody's going to be like that. Some people are old. Some people are boring and are more suited to games like World of Warcraft. But I liked it long throw. That doesn't mean that it has to be that way, but this current implementation is... And, the thing is that a lot of this is subjective feel, right? And we cannot balance this based off of feel. For me, the feel that I liked was the 2004 one. And the amount of distance that you got in 2004 is not appropriate for the scale that we have in this game, right? But, there's also the refiring times. When the refiring time was 0.3, it was longer than in past games. And so you felt like you couldn't translocate to certain places because it was too close. I think that's why they changed it.
Yeah.
On the split side, the change that they made this week makes the translocator feel like tar and just drives me bat insane because I translocated and I'm ready to make the next throw and get to where I want to go, and it stops me. Now I've lost additional time because I don't have the timing right on it yet. It sucks. And it's hard to make balancing decisions when your perception is that much in the way. That's why we're going to have to be really smart about it. And we're going to have to decide what kind of a game do we actually want. Like, okay, if a fast game is not necessarily what we want, then what exactly is the balance that we want? And let's make a translocator that matches that instead of just, dinking around with values until it quote unquote feels good.
Right. And that's totally true in my opinion. It's too hard to balance a game exclusively to how it feels. I mean, everybody has a different idea of what feels good. And so we have to look at the numbers to a certain degree and say, do these numbers make sense? And I think if you go back and watch the podcast from 3 weeks ago, I said the translocator was really frustrating because when you threw it, it felt like it took just too long for you to be able to translocate to it. Now you have the same problem right after you've translocated. You can't throw it again for that small extra amount of time, and it's a little bit frustrating. So I should clarify a little bit. I'm not arguing for bringing charges back. Yeah. I'm just saying that having some kind of limitation on the translocator is a good idea, and I believe there's balance changes that can be made that don't involve slowing down the translocator and making the disc move less distance and those sort of things.
Yep. Okay, so let's move on to team boosting. team boosting is in the game now. It actually was always there, but it just was completely useless because it only bumped them like, a foot.
Yeah.
But now you can boost people. You can boost them with rockets. You can boost them with the shock combos. The minigun is actually very, very effective with it. But it is not the team boosting from UT99, not even close.
Yeah, you definitely can't get the kind of air that you could get in UT. I mean, with a well-planned boost in UT, there were some maps that you could pretty much launch yourself entirely across. And it was ridiculously powerful in UT. But here, the boost does give you some benefits in specific scenarios. For example, one that we had been talking about earlier today was that if you're running and somebody's behind you shooting the shock rifle primary at you, they could basically get you running significantly faster than you normally could. Mm-hmm. That's a good help for helping you get across a map in CTF, for example. But in terms of being able to launch people, most of the weapons, the amount of momentum they give you, you couldn't really launch that far. Sure, you could get some distance, but in comparison to like an impact hammer jump or a rocket jump, you're pretty much in that same range with a boost.
It's about equal to if you boosted yourself with the rocket launcher. The advantage is that you don't take self-damage, and the disadvantage is that you need another person to help you, which kind of exposes, I think, still the problem with team boosting. It's really hard on new players because they don't get that somebody just shot me in across the map or however far it was, and that's an intentional part of the game and that it's a critical part of the game. They think that it's cheese and they don't want to do it, or they simply don't have the capability or ability to do it. I found it very, very difficult when I was getting my first footage last week to find somebody that would help me team boost and show it in action. I don't actually have like any in-game footage of boosting because it's just too difficult to set up in a pub. And the issue is that if you get two guys that are on TeamSpeak come into a pub and start team boosting, they're just going to absolutely slaughter everybody.
Yeah. Well, even if you just look at how much extra speed you can get running if somebody's running behind you shooting their shock rifle at you. I mean, in any area where there's not a lot of combat going on, if you're just speeding somebody up with the shock rifle, you could cut in half the amount of time they get across the map.
Oh, yeah. And the funny thing is that when I did that with my teammates, they got mad at me. They're like, why are you shooting at me? they don't get it. I really don't know how you can make team boosting make sense to new players. I think it's always going to be a negative thing for new players.
Well, and I think that's definitely true, especially in normal weapons game type, because nobody ever expects to get shot by their teammates intentionally in a team game.
Right.
The exception that I'll make is in Instagib Capture the Flag. Team boosting is a huge strategy in that game type, and I don't have any problem with it being accentuated even more in that game type, because that's, again, one of those things that makes Capture the Flag stand out in UT.
You know, another thing that I want to bring up is the offensive-defensive balance, right? In the past 2 weeks, offense has been given a huge buff. So the fact that a defender can no longer beat the flag carrier back to the flagon if the defender dies in the middle, that's a big buff to attackers, because that's a lot of flags in the past that I have stopped from being capped. They would be capped. Yeah, you can find lots of examples in the podcast. But then there's team boosting. Team boosting is a big help to offense. So we've gotten 2 big boosts to offense. I really don't think the offense needed it. Most of the games that we've been playing at Frag BU, at least, have been fairly high-scoring games. I remember in past games at CTF map going 2-3, and these are going like, 5, 6, 7 scores.
It is a little bit hard to compare because in previous games we were dealing with a lot more people with a wider variety of skills, and now there's less people that are involved. But I mean, you can go back and look at the podcast 3 weeks ago and check out the scores on the CTF games. I mean, they're very high-scoring games, and there's probably many explanations for that, but one of the explanations is that it's very easy to make a flag run in the game right now.
Well, a lot of it is the maps. A lot of it is the weapon balance. A lot of it is the new moves that we have. Team boosting just plays into this. CTF Outside is a really good example. You could definitely abuse the rockets before, but now you can use the rockets to get to the middle and not take any health penalty, right? So now if somebody team boosts and I'm a defender that's just respawned, I can't catch up to their flag carrier until they're like already in their shock.
Yep.
That's a big advantage for an offensive player.
I mean, a lot of these things are going to get tweaked and things are going to change, and so there's no saying that this is how it's going to stay forever.
No. I mean, we know that they're going to make more changes to the Translocator for sure, and this is only their first pass with team boosting, so it's definitely going to change.
But it's something that you have to keep in mind. I mean, I know that there have been CTF teams in the past where it's just extremely hard to get to break their defense, but to me, that's the challenge. Like, if you're playing a regular sport and the other team has a really killer defense, you might have a hard time scoring the flag. But the tension that's created by the situations that you get into make the game more interesting to play and more interesting to watch. Sure, the game might end 0-1, but that doesn't mean that the game wasn't crazy fun to watch. Now, if games are going 0-0 all the time, then maybe there's something that needs to be looked at there. But I don't think that we were anywhere close to that scenario before. And to me, these changes just make it so that the scores are just going to go up even further the way that it is right now. So I think the reason why we're bringing all these things up is we want to make sure that that's factored in as further changes are made. We're not saying poo-poo on it being this way right now. We're saying think about these things as we try to make further balancing changes.
All right, so let's move on to some of the weapon changes. They've made a lot of interesting weapon changes. Let's start with the minigun, because that's kind of the most interesting in my opinion.
Well, with the minigun right now, the biggest thing is that when you shoot the alt fire at the walls or the floor, it'll stick the stake in there.
It stays.
Yeah. And you can use it on the ground a little bit for it to blow up and boost you a little bit. It doesn't give you a huge boost the way it is right now. But the more interesting thing that it does right now is you can stick the stakes into the wall and you can kind of jump on them. I don't know that it does a ton for you the way it is implemented right now, but it is kind of an interesting thing, an interesting concept. It's fun to play around with.
We're basically shamelessly stealing this idea from Reflex. So Reflex has a stake gun, and you can shoot the stakes into the wall and jump off of them. And this is exactly the same thing. Now, there's a little bit of weirdness with it this week. I don't think it works with the netcode quite right, because every time that I tried doing it, it did all sorts of really weird things to me. But the basic idea is you can throw the stakes into the wall, and then you can jump along the wall, and when you hit the stake, it will blow up. And it actually does about 10 damage to you. But you could use that to get to somewhere that you could never get with any other boosting method. So it's an interesting idea. But it makes it really ideal for the team boosting to use that secondary fire on the minigun. It's probably the best way to boost people.
Yep.
Okay, the goo gun. So they changed the goo gun a little bit. Now certain goo globs will like flash, and if you shoot them with the link gun, they'll actually like explode and create a web for you.
Yeah.
I still think it's completely useless. Don't use it.
They're trying to make it so it's easier to set webs up. But some of the changes that they made this week is what you just mentioned. They also made it so that webs only live for like 20 or 30 seconds before they collapse.
Yeah, it's not as long.
I think that it's just like it was before, where it's more likely that your team is going to mess up whatever you're trying to do rather than you succeed in whatever it was you were trying to do.
It's not going to help you. It's not going to help you win a game right now.
Yeah, well, the fact that it requires 2 weapons to set up a web is already challenging. You either have to have 2 people doing it, or you have to switch between weapons yourself, which introduces some time lag between when things are happening. So the concept is interesting, but I just think that if it's going to work, it needs to be changed even quite a bit more than the way it is now. I think you'd have to do something where the webs stay around a lot longer and your team has no chance to break them. If someone on your team runs through them, it does nothing to them or something like that. That's the only way that I could see the web mechanic actually making a significant difference in the game right now.
Yeah. Our next one is the impact hammer. So they changed the alt fire of the impact hammer. It now kind of shoots an air puff and it will actually push enemies. So it won't hurt them. It'll just kind of like move them.
Well, and it still blocks projectiles too. So it's the same as it was before, but it has a little air puff. So if you're in somebody's face and you alt fire the impact hammer right when they shot a rocket at you, it's going to blow up in their face and push them away from you. And the same with other types of projectiles. I mean, it'll block the shock core and link gun and stuff like that. But whether it's making a significant difference to the game, I mean, it is a little disorienting, I guess, if you get bumped by it. But in general, it would have to do a lot more to you before it actually made a significant difference in a fight.
And I think the other thing is that I'm just not going to switch to the impact hammer if I have a real weapon, generally speaking.
Unless you're just trying to troll with the
impact hammer. You can still troll with the impact hammer, but since Timmy isn't around much right now, you don't see as much of that, but you can still do it. I think that in order to make this mechanic used more, they're going to have to reduce the weapon switch time. All right, maps. Crash Site is in there. I know everybody's really super excited to play this map, but it shows a lot of potential. But the big thing about this one is it's completely asymmetric.
Yep. Yeah, and in fact, if you watch the Epic stream from this past week, they go through the map and talk about asymmetrical maps, and they're actually interested in doing crazy kinds of asymmetrical maps. I mean, they're talking about stuff where the flags are stacked on top of each other, and that plays into it somehow. But Crash Site's pretty interesting. I really like the layout, and I really like the look of it. Like, they put a lot of effort into making it look really cool, and it kind of gives off, even without being meshed or textured or anything, it still kind of gives off that Unreal vibe.
Oh yeah.
And it does have a nollie cross in the back of it. I don't know if you noticed.
It looks to me like another ship that crashed
Yep.
on Nepali, and there's like a nollie cross in the back of it, and there's just this absolutely gigantic ship that's overlooking this kind of nollie temple sort of a thing.
It is a really cool looking map, and the fact that it's mostly BSP is just ridiculous. I was like, how did it?
Now, gameplay-wise, there's a lot of interesting gameplay features in it that you have new ideas. So one of the things that's really cool is that there's a spot where you can jump off, and it's a really, really long jump. And if you do that jump, you will take damage, pretty significant damage. But there is jump boots right at the bottom, and if you can land it just right, you will take the jump boots, and you won't take any damage.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. I'm interested to see how that plays out. And the jump boots in that map, you should time. If you're a timer, you should time the jump boots because they make a big difference, especially going into the nollie side.
Yeah, there's a lot of different runs you can do. If you grab the flag, there's a lot of different ways you can go as long as you have the boots.
Yep. I'm glad that they did the asymmetrical map solely for the reason that it got them thinking about what kind of new interesting map-specific mechanics can we add in there.
The reason why we've needed an asymmetrical map, and the question really is, does halftime make sense, and is this going to prove the value or the worthlessness of halftime? I think that it's probably worth playing this map a lot, trying to see if the halftime thing makes sense and actually does what they hoped it would do, which is make asymmetrical maps more even and balanced. Hopefully we'll have a better idea of whether that's true after playing with this map.
It may be the case that this map is so cool looking that it will convince people that halftime is okay. You know, I don't think Epic is going to change their minds on halftime at this point. They seem pretty committed to it. The question I would be asking myself if I was Epic was, am I willing to listen to people complain about it for the next 10 years? But this one map may just save us from that pain.
Yep.
So I hope it works out. I really do. All right, so the other maps. Blank has been in the build for a couple of weeks now, but they've made some significant changes to it. It wasn't the first week that it was in there. It wasn't really finished.
Yeah.
But there's a river that goes down the center of it, and if you jump in the river, you go really, really fast. It's really easy to take the flag and get it past the halfway mark, but...
Yep. Well, and there's so many different paths you can go down, too. I mean, as a defender, there's a lot of different places that you have to cover. And so getting the flag out past the defenders is, once you have an idea of where the defenders hang out, you can pretty easily find a path that's going to get you out quickly.
I would like to see the middle of this map change a little bit. So one of the things that I think is a problem, we talked about that offense seems really strong right now, and I think that the maps is a really big culprit. And if you look at a lot of UT99 maps, one of the reasons why they worked, the issue where once you get past the halfway mark, you're pretty much home free, that was an issue in UT99 too. But in UT99, the centers of the map were usually where a lot of the action was anyways, and so that wasn't as big of a problem because there was usually a huge epic battle in the middle. I would like to see Blank be modified a little bit so that you could actually have that epic battle there in the middle. Right now it's just not happening. Part of it, I think, is that there's just so much Z-axis in there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of closed off areas and small entryways and things like that. So, I mean, the middle of Blank is not large. You can dodge across it twice. I mean, it's a very small middle.
Like a really good example of a map that has a good middle and pass game, Orbital. You know, think about how Orbital plays. That's what I would like to see. We have one last thing we want to talk about, and that is, as promised, we have set up a second server instance. It is called Phayder Labs, after the corporation that developed the Necrus, and we're going to be putting up different mutators on there.
Right now it's running my dodge jump mutator. I think it's probably not working right now because I haven't put out a new build, a new
yeah, we have to update it this weekend. But by the time you get this, we should have it fixed.
Yes, and also I'll point out that this week I will have a weapon replacement mutator ready, and I will be posting that on the forums. I did put a pull request in for it, but I will post it in the forums so that people can mess around with it and see if they like it, and hopefully maybe get some ideas for additional features.
With the weapon replacement mutator, that will put us into the position where the community can now really prototype new weapons and actually have them tested, which has been a big barrier. I know a lot of people have complained about weapon balance, and the answer is always, well, you know, why don't you prototype it? And, well, it's kind of hard to do that and test it right now. Once we have this weapon replacement mutator, we'll be able to do that. There's already some weapons that people have posted on the forums that we can try it out with. So, and of course, you'll be able to do arena too.
Yeah.
So
well, you just replace every weapon with one weapon,
exactly. So,
or whatever. And we have some plans for some other mutators that we'll probably post throughout this week. But
we're going to continually switch out what the server is running to do tests, and we're going to be setting up specific times to play test. All right. Well, that's it. Whew, that was long.
Yep.
All right. As always, like and subscribe to your channel. We love comments.
Come visit us in IRC. Come to the Beyond Unreal forums. Come to the UT forums and contribute. Frag BU every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We have some great discussion on our videos. I kind of want to try and focus that a little bit. So this week, every week we want to ask a question. And this week the question is, what do you ultimately want from a CTF translocator? What is the end goal? Do you want it to be primarily for transversing? Do you want it to be really easy to telefrag people? What is your end goal? A lot of the time we talk about the specifics, that it shouldn't have charges or it should go this far or that far. You know, think bigger than that. What is the end goal? What do you want the flavor of the game from your translocator? So that's the question this week. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.